The humid dawn of July 1944 hung over Hollandia airfield like a sodden blanket, heavy with the scent of crushed jungle fronds and diesel exhaust. The air was thick, almost chewable, laced with the faint rot of mangrove swamps that clawed at the edges of the airstrip. Runway 1 stretched out like a scar on the green hide of New Guinea, a ribbon of crushed coral and oiled gravel, pitted from the relentless monsoon rains that turned paradise into a quagmire. Overhead, the sky was a bruised purple, reluctant to yield to the sun, as if it knew the fragile aluminum birds clawing for altitude would soon pierce its veil and vanish into the vast, unforgiving Pacific. In the pre-flight shack, a corrugated tin hut that rattled with every gust from the Owen Stanley range, Lieutenant Elias Hayes wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of a grease-smeared glove. At 22, Hayes was the newest ghost in the 431st Fighter Squadron, his face still boyish under the stubble, eyes wide with the kind of fear that hadn't yet hardened into fatalism. His flight suit clung to him like a second skin, soaked before he'd even strapped in. Around him, the other pilots of the four-ship formation milled about, veterans of the 475th Fighter Group, their movements economical, voices low and edged with the gravel of too many cigarettes and too few hours of sleep. "All right, listen up," barked Captain Harlan Reese, the flight lead, his voice cutting through the hum of idling generators like a prop wash. Reese was a wiry man in his late 20s, with a scar snaking down his cheek from a flak burst over Rabaul. He slapped a dog-eared copy of the P-38 Lightning Pilot's Handbook onto the rickety table, its pages warped from the humidity. "Today's the drill. 2200 RPM, full rich mixture until 10,000 feet, then lean it to 40 inches manifold. Cruise at economy settings. Watch those gauges like they're your sweetheart's eyes. Target's a supply dump 350 miles northwest near Weiwok. In, strafe, out. No heroics. Fuel's our goddamned enemy today." The men nodded, a ritual as ingrained as crossing themselves before a dive. Hayes felt the weight of it all pressing down. The manual wasn't just paper, it was scripture, etched into their bones during endless hours at Luke Field back in Arizona. RPM limits, power charts, mixture controls. Every tick of the throttle, every nudge of the prop pitch, governed by numbers that promised survival in a theater where the ocean below was a graveyard for the unwary. For 2 years, those rules had been their lifeline. They'd nursed Pratt & Whitney twin wasps across the Coral Sea, dodged Zeros over Guadalcanal, and limped home from Biak with vapors in the tanks. But lately, the missions were stretching thinner than the fuel lines. Targets creeping farther into enemy skies, rescue ops dragging into the endless blue where radio silence meant eternity. Hayes glanced at Major Thomas McGuire, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, his flight jacket slung over one shoulder like a cape. McGuire was the squadron's ace, already 20 kills to his name, a boy wonder from New Jersey with a grin that could charm a kamikaze off course. But even he looked drawn, the lines around his eyes deeper since the push-up from Finchhafen. "You good, kid?" McGuire murmured, clapping Hayes on the shoulder. His touch was firm, reassuring, but Hayes caught the flicker of something else. Doubt? No, couldn't be. McGuire was the one who quoted the manual like poetry. "Yes, sir," Hayes replied, forcing a nod. "I'm terrified, but I'll be damned if I show it." Inside, his mind raced. What if the engine quits at 300 miles out? What if the mixture floods and I flame out over that godforsaken atoll? The manual said it wouldn't happen if you followed the charts. But the charts didn't account for the headwinds off the Huon Gulf, or the extra drag from bullet-riddled wings, or the sheer bone-deep exhaustion of flying in a cockpit that baked like an oven by noon. Outside, the ground crew swarmed the P-38s like ants on a carcass. Tech Sergeant Victor Kowalski, a barrel-chested Pole from Chicago with hands like hams, knelt by Hayes' bird. Pudgy 4, a Lightning with twin booms that gleamed dully under the emerging sun. Kowalski's rag wiped away the night's condensation from the cowling, his ears attuned to the subtle ticks of cooling metal. He'd seen engines cough their last from over-revving, cylinders scored from lean mixtures run too hot. "She's purring, Lieutenant," he grunted, straightening up. "But remember, no pushing her past 24,400 on takeoff. These Allisons eat fuel like a recruit at Chow." Hayes managed a weak smile. Kowalski was the mechanic's mechanic, stubborn, superstitious, the kind who whispered to the radials as if they had souls. If anyone believed in the manual, it was him. "Thanks, Sarge. Keep her thirsty for me." The formation taxied out in a haze of blue smoke and coral dust, props chewing the thick air into a whirlwind that bent the kunai grass flat. Hayes slotted in as tail end Charlie, his heart sinking with the rhythmic thunder of the engines, thrum, 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 as they lumbered down the strip. The stick trembled in his gloved hand, alive with power barely contained. Rotation came at 120 knots, a gentle liftoff that fooled no one. The Pacific Theater demanded every ounce of climb rate to clear the jungle canopy. Up they went, 4 silver fork-tailed devils slicing through the mist, banking northwest toward the target. At 15,000 feet, the world flattened into a watercolor smear. Emerald islands ringed by turquoise foam, the endless gray-blue of the Bismarck Sea below, like a rumpled bedsheet. Oxygen masks hissed coldly against their faces, the chill seeping through flight suits despite the equatorial heat below. Radio chatter crackled sparingly, Reese's voice, clipped and professional. "Flight, check in. Green on fuel? 2, green. 3, green. 4, green," Hayes echoed, eyes flicking to his gauges. The fuel flow needle hovered at 180 pounds per hour per side, right on the book. Manifold pressure steady at 38 inches, RPM locked at 2200. Everything's fine. Just fly the profile. But as the formation droned on, the whispers of doubt crept in like contrails. Hayes had heard the rumors in the mess tent 2 nights back. A civilian consultant, some big shot from back home, had flown a solo hop from Weiwok to Hollandia, over 400 miles, and touched down with tanks half full. Impossible. The manual maxed cruise range at 1,200 miles with drop tanks. But that was theory. Clean air, no combat load. In reality, it was half that on a good day. "Bogey, 11 o'clock low." McGuire's voice snapped Hayes back, adrenaline flooding his veins like ice water. Far below, a glint, Japanese reconnaissance float plane, a Jake or a roof, skimming the wave tops. Reese keyed the mic. "Flight, arm guns, dive on my mark." The world tilted as they rolled in, G-forces pinning Hayes to his seat, the Lightning's nose dipping like a falcon's stoop. Wind howled over the canopy, dropped the airframe groaning under 300 miles per hour. Tracers stitched the sea as they hosed the intruder, bullets sparking off the water in white geysers. The Jap plane cartwheeled into foam, a smoking wreck. "Splash 1, Reese whooped, but the thrill was short-lived. Pulling out at 500 feet, Hayes glanced at his gauges again. Fuel flow spiking from the dive, now 220 puppy hour. Damn. That's 10 minutes burned. The return leg loomed, 350 miles of headwind and uncertainty. 2 hours in, the formation tightened as fuel anxiety set in. Reese's voice again. "Flight, lean to auto, conserve." Hayes twisted the mixture knob, watching the exhaust stack temp climb toward the red line. 580 degrees per the book. "Hold steady. Don't flood her." Sweat beaded inside his mask, the cockpit a sauna of oil fumes and recycled breath. McGuire's Lightning drifted closer on the wing, a reassuring shadow. Through the canopy glass, Hayes caught his major's thumbs up, but McGuire's eyes, God, those eyes, held a shadow. He's thinking it too. The range just isn't there anymore. Not for Weiwok runs, not for the push to the Philippines. By the 4-hour mark, the coastline of New Guinea hove into view, jagged and mist-shrouded. But the target dump was a bust, bombed out weeks ago, now just charred palm trunks and abandoned rice sacks. "No joy on secondaries," Reese reported. "RTB, boys, punch those drops if you have to." Hayes' heart sank. His starboard tank read 150 gallons, barely enough for the hop home, no margin for evasion. The manual screamed warnings. Do not exceed 2300 RPM in emergency climb. Maintain 50% power for loiter. But loiter? There was no loiter in war. It was push or perish. The return was a study in tension. The formation echeloned low to hug the terrain, dodging cumulus towers that boiled up like thunderheads. Turbulence buffeted them, the lightnings bucking like unbroken mustangs. Hayes's hands ached on the stick, every adjustment a calculation. Fuel pressure dropping, check the boost pump. CHT at 460, ease off the throttle. McGuire's voice broke the silence. 4, you solid? Affirm, 3, but she's thirsty. Hang tight, kid. Field in sight, 20 mics. They crossed the coastline at 1,000 feet, the airfield's coral strip a beacon amid the green hell. Reese greased his landing first, tires chirping on the gravel. McGuire followed, a perfect wheel. Hayes was third, his mains kissing the runway with a puff of dust, the prop blast scattering ground crew like leaves. He taxied to dispersal, killing the engines with a shuddering whine that echoed his relief. Silence fell, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant roar of a supply C-47. But as Hayes clambered down the ladder, legs wobbling like a fawn's, he saw it. The fourth bird, McGuire's wingman, Captain Reese's own deputy, Lieutenant Harlan, Hank Fowler, rolling to a stop. No, not rolling, coasting. Engine silent before the chocks. Fowler popped the canopy, face ashen, and waved off the fuel truck. Gauge error, he muttered to Kowalski, who was already hooking up the Bowser. Must be. Landed on fumes, starboard at 0, port at 20. Kowalski's brow furrowed, his dipstick probing the tanks. The crew gathered, murmurs rising like smoke. Hayes edged closer, heart pounding. Fowler's Lightning, hell's a poppin', had the same loadout, same profile. How? The manual didn't lie, or did it? That night in the officers' club, a sagging tent lit by kerosene lanterns that flickered shadows across mosquito-netted cots, the story spread like malaria. Colonel Charles McDonald, the 475th's commanding officer, held court at the head table, his pipe clenched between teeth, yellowed from years of command. McDonald was a Texan through and through. Tall, drawling, with a mustache that drooped like a gunslinger's and eyes that missed nothing. He'd led the group from Dobadura to Noam4, turning raw kids into killers. But tonight, his voice carried an undercurrent of unease as he recounted the debrief. Fowler's bird had 180 gallons left, boys. Dipstick don't lie. Same mission, same wind, same everything. He swears he flew the book, 2200 RPM, 38 inches, auto lean at altitude. But those numbers, they don't add up. McDonald tapped the manual on the table, its cover frayed like an old Bible. Around him, pilots nursed warm beers, the air thick with cigarette haze and the tang of quinine tablets. McGuire sat to his right, silent, nursing a bruise on his knuckles from shadowboxing frustration. Hayes hovered at the edge, feeling like an intruder in a world of giants. Major Elias Peterson, the group's executive officer and resident skeptic, leaned forward, his spectacles glinting in the lamplight. Peterson was the counterweight to McDonald's fire, a Princeton man, precise as a slide rule, who quoted regs like a prosecutor. Gauge malfunction, sir. Or Fowler got lucky on the jet stream. We can't chase ghosts. The manual's tested. Lockheed's engineers didn't pull those figures out of thin air. Tested in Ohio, Pete. McGuire cut in, his voice low but sharp. Not in this soup, not with 500-pounders slung under and zeros on your 6. We're losing boys to ditching because the range just ain't there. He glanced at Hayes, a nod of inclusion. Kid here's on his 5th hop, already knows the math. 350 miles out, you're gambling with the tide. Hayes swallowed, the club's humidity closing his throat. He's right. Last week we lost Eddie Vance, P-38 down off Manus, no shoot. Fuel starvation, they said. But what if? He trailed off, the thought too dangerous to voice. McDonald puffed his pipe, smoke curling like a question mark. Speaking of ghosts, that civilian fella, Lindbergh, Kenny's pet project. Lands tomorrow from Weiwok, supposed to consult on engine mods. Flew the Atlantic solo, they say. Thinks he can teach us Yanks how to squeeze blood from a stone. The tent erupted in chuckles, tension breaking like a wave. Peterson snorted. Lindbergh? The Lone Eagle? Man's a relic, barnstormer in a war of jets. What's he know about Allison's? More than we think, McGuire murmured, almost to himself. He'd heard the whispers from the 433rd, Lindbergh's hop from Espiritu Santo, 600 miles on a tank that should have run dry. Flew leaner than regs allow. Low RPM, high pressure, came back with reserve for a victory lap. Heresy, Peterson shot back, but his eyes narrowed. Over square settings? That's valve float waiting to happen. Cylinders'll cook like eggs on a skillet. The debate swirled on, voices rising and falling with the tropic night chorus outside, cicadas screaming, distant howls of quokkas in the brush. Hayes slipped away to his cot, the manual clutched under his arm like a talisman. Lying there, oxygen mask dangling from the net overhead, he traced the power charts by flashlight. 2200 RPM, 40 inches max, full rich below 10,000, numbers that had saved lives, numbers that were failing now. But in the quiet, as the lanterns guttered out and snores filled the tent, Hayes heard the engine ghosts, the deep, resonant hum of a radial run low and slow, not the frantic buzz of Mac's crews. Lindbergh's way. What if it's not heresy? What if it's freedom? The next morning broke with a vengeance, sun slashing through the mist like bayonets, turning the airfield into a steam bath. Hayes was pre-flighting Pudgy 4 when the C-47 transport circled low, props thundering. It touched down in a swirl of coral, disgorging a figure in khakis, slight, unassuming, with a face carved from newsreels. Charles Lindbergh. No entourage, no brass, just a leather helmet under one arm and a duffel slung over his shoulder. He moved with the quiet economy of a man who'd once bet his life on a single tank of gas. MacDonald met him at dispersal, hand extended. "Colonel MacDonald, 475th. Welcome to hell, Mr. Lindbergh." "Slim's fine, Colonel," Lindbergh replied, his voice soft, almost diffident, with that Minnesota lilt that cut through the din. His eyes, cool, assessing, swept the line of lightnings, lingering on the cowlings as if reading their secrets. "Heard you've got range troubles. Mind if I take one up, see what she's got?" MacDonald hesitated, glancing at Peterson, who hovered like a bailiff. "Regs say civilians don't solo our birds, sir. Insurance and all." Lindbergh smiled faintly, the ghost of a man who defied oceans. "Then log me as observer. But let me set the dials." An hour later they were airborne. Lindbergh in the rear seat of McGuire's Pudgy 3, a two-seater Lightning jury-rigged for the demo. Hayes watched from the tarmac, Kowalski at his side, as the twin booms lifted off, graceful as herons. The formation climbed east toward the empty sea, vanishing into the haze. 3 hours passed. Then 4. The ground crew paced, coffee growing cold in tin cups. Peterson checked his watch every 5 minutes, muttering about fuel burn. "He'll bingo out there, mark my words." At 4.2 hours, a speck appeared on the horizon, growing, resolving into silver. Pudgy 3 circled the field once, low and slow, before lining up for approach. Engines idled, not the usual 1800 RPM wind down, but deeper, throatier like a lion's purr. It touched down smooth, taxiing in with props feathering lazily. McGuire popped the canopy first, grinning like a wolf. "You believe this shit, Colonel?" He hopped down, helping Lindbergh to the ground. The civilian moved stiffly, aviator's kinks in his neck, but his eyes sparkled with that rare light. Vindication. MacDonald strode up, Peterson and Hayes trailing. Kowalski had the dipstick ready. "How much she burn?" the colonel demanded. Lindbergh dusted his hands. "Set her at 1600 RPM, 48 inches manifold. Auto lean throughout, came back with 320 gallons reserve. That's double your book range, easy." The crew froze. Peterson's face drained white. "Over square? That's against every chart. Valves'll hammer, temps'll spike." "Didn't," Lindbergh said simply, pulling a notebook from his pocket. Pages filled with scribbled curves and temps. "Longer power strokes mean cleaner burn, cooler cylinders, less fuel for the same thrust. I learned it crossing the Atlantic. Works here too, if you trust the engine over the book." Kowalski plunged the stick into the tanks, emerging with readings that silenced the doubters. Starboard 410, port 405. Untouched, almost. Hayes stared, the math unraveling in his head. 4 hours at cruise, combat config and half the burn? His hands trembled, not from fear now, but from the vertigo of revelation. MacDonald lit his pipe, exhaling slowly. "Son of a bitch, you just flew what the manual calls suicide." Lindbergh shrugged, but his gaze held them all. Pilot, mechanic, commander. Manuals are written by men who never left the ground. Out here, you write your own. As the sun dipped toward the mountains, painting the lightnings in bloody gold, Hayes lingered by his bird, fingers tracing the throttle quadrant. The air cooled, carrying the salt tang of the sea, the faint vibration of idling trucks. McGuire clapped him on the back. "What do you think, kid? Fly her his way tomorrow?" Hayes looked up at the emptying sky, where contrails faded like unanswered prayers. "The rules kept us alive, but they chained us too." Aloud, he whispered, "What if the book is wrong?" The moon hung low over Hollandia that night, a sickle of silver slicing through the veil of clouds that smothered New Guinea like a fever dream. The airfield lay shrouded in darkness, save for the sporadic glow of foxhole cigarettes and the faint red beacons marking the runway's edge, ghost lights to guide the lost home. The jungle beyond the perimeter wire thrummed with life, the guttural croak of tree frogs, the rustle of unseen paws in the undergrowth, the occasional scream of a fruit bat wheeling through the canopy. It was the hour when the day's heat surrendered to a clammy chill, when sweat-soaked flight suits turned clammy against the skin, and men who flew by day sought solace in the shadows of their machines. Lieutenant Elias Hayes couldn't sleep. The officer's tent was a symphony of discomfort, snores rattling like distant flak, the slap of mosquito nets against cots, the faint chemical bite of atabrine tablets dissolving on tongues. He'd tried reading the manual by the dim light of a shielded flashlight, its pages whispering promises of control. Cruise power, 2200 RPM, 3640 inches manifold pressure. Fuel consumption, 140-160 gallons per hour at 15,000 feet. But the words blurred, overwritten by Lindbergh's calm recitation that afternoon, 1600 RPM 48 inches. Auto lean. Cleaner burn. Heresy, Peterson had called it. Yet the dipstick hadn't lied. Hayes rolled onto his side, the canvas cot creaking under him, and stared at the tent flap. What if it's not heresy? What if it's the key to coming home? He slipped out barefoot, the coral gravel biting into his soles like rice paper, and made for the dispersal area. The P-38s loomed in the gloom like slumbering predators, their twin tails silhouetted against the star-pricked sky. Pudgy 4 waited there, cowling still warm from the day's patrols, the faint scent of castor oil and 100-octane clinging to her like perfume. Hayes ran a hand along the leading edge of the wing, feeling the rivets cool under his palm, the aluminum skin humming faintly with residual vibration. It was a ritual, this touch, a ward against the void. A shadow detached from the hangar wall. Tech Sergeant Victor Kowalski, nursing a cigarette, its ember flaring like a signal flare. The mechanic's bulk filled the doorway, his overalls stained with the day's grime, grease black as midnight, flecked with hydraulic fluid, the color of old blood. "Can't sleep either, Lieutenant?" Kowalski grunted, flicking ash into the dirt. His voice was a low rumble, Polish vowels softened by years in the yards of Gary, Indiana. Hayes startled, then relaxed. "Sarge, just thinking." He hesitated, glancing at the silent birds. "About Lindbergh's demo. Those numbers, how?" Kowalski exhaled smoke, the cloud curling toward the stars. "Engines don't lie, sir, but men do. I pulled the plugs after he landed, clean as a nun's conscience. No carbon buildup, no scoring on the cylinders. Ran her over square like he said, low prop, high boost, and she sipped fuel like fine scotch. Temp stayed at 420, not the 500 we chase on book settings." He stubbed the butt under his boot, grinding it with deliberate care. "But regs say it'll shake the valves loose, float 'em right out the heads." "And if it doesn't?" Hayes pressed, his voice barely above the jungle's murmur. "If it lets us reach Weiwok without praying to every saint in the book? You think it's worth a test?" Kowalski's eyes gleamed in the half-light, weighing the boy against the warrior. "For science? Maybe. For war? Hell yes, but not on the clock. Dawn patrols at 500. Colonel'd have my stripes if he caught us monkeying." He jerked his thumb toward the hangar, a Quonset hut half buried in sandbags, its curved roof leaking memories of tin roofs back home. "Come on, got a bird prepped. No eyes, no ears." They moved like conspirators, Hayes's heart hammering a staccato rhythm against his ribs. The hangar smelled of avgas and canvas dope, the air thick with the metallic tang of tools scattered on workbenches. A single bulb dangled from the rafters, casting long shadows that danced like specters. Kowalski selected a lightning from the maintenance rotation. Whirlwind, her nose art a faded cyclone devouring a rising sun, grounded for a minor prop track adjustment. "She'll do," he muttered, heaving the access panels. "Start her cold. We'll log it as a ground run." Hayes climbed into the cockpit, the wicker seat cradling him like an old friend, the stick familiar in his grip. The instruments glowed faintly under the red filter. Altimeter steady at sea level, airspeed alive at 0. He ran the pre-start checklist by rote, mixture rich, props fine, boost pumps on. Kowalski swung the inertial starter, the engine coughing to life with a belch of blue smoke, the Port Allison settling into a throaty idle. The vibration coursed through the airframe, a deep bass note that resonated in Hayes' chest. Thrum, 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 slower than the frantic tattoo of standard idle. "Throttle up slow," Kowalski's voice crackled over the intercom, tinny through the headset. He stood by the cowl, ear to the nacelle, listening to the internals like a doctor auscultating a heart. "Set 1600 RPM, manifold to 48. Hayes complied, his gloved hand easing the levers forward. The tachometers unwound lazily, the needles creeping past 1,000, settling at 1600. Manifold pressure climbed 40, 45, 48 inches, the boost gauge quivering like a divining rod. The cockpit filled with the engine's song, not the high-pitched whine of Mac's crews, but a resonant growl, as if the Allison were stretching after a long sleep. Oil pressure green, temps nominal, feels wrong, too smooth, like she's holding back. But the fuel flow, God the flow, hovered at 110 gallons per hour, a whisper where the book demanded a shout. "How's she sound?" Kowalski called, his face illuminated by the exhaust glow. "Like she's purring, Sarge. CHT at 380, EGT steady at 1400. Hayes watched the cylinder head temps, expecting the needles to spike, the warning buzzers to wail. But nothing. The engine thrummed steadily, the prop a lazy blur in the prop wash. He advanced the throttle a hair, simulating cruise, airspeed building to 180 knots in ground effect, though chained to the tarmac. Fuel flow ticked up to 120 mph, still half the book burn. For this power? Disbelief coiled in his gut, tight as a spring. They ran her for 20 minutes, Kowalski jotting notes on a grease pencil pad, Hayes scanning gauges like a man reading tea leaves. Exhaust gas temps held cool, valves hushed without the chatter of overspeed. When they shut down, the silence rang profound, the engine ticking softly as heat bled away. Kowalski popped the cowl, peering inside with a flashlight. "Plugs look good, no hot spots. She's happy, Lieutenant. Damn happy." Hayes descended the ladder, legs unsteady, the night's humidity beating on his skin like dew. "It works. Jesus, it works." Awe crept in, edging out the fear. A quiet wonder, like glimpsing the curve of the earth from 30,000 feet. "We've been flogging these birds like workhorses, but they're stallions if you let 'em breathe." "Don't go crowing yet," Kowalski warned, though his grin split the shadows. "Word gets out, Peterson'll court-martial us both. But tell McGuire, quiet-like, man's got the ear of the colonel." By dawn, the whispers had begun, not in the open, where brass could hear, but in the foxholes and the flight line, passed like contraband smokes. Major Thomas McGuire caught it first from Hayes during the breakfast lineup. Powdered eggs and spam under a tarp awning that dripped condensation like a leaky faucet. The mess was a hive of low talk. Pilots hunched over tin trays, the air heavy with the sizzle of fat and the bitterness of instant coffee. McGuire, ever the opportunist, leaned in close, his fork pausing midair. "You tested it? Over square?" Hayes nodded, glancing over his shoulder at Peterson, who sat rigid at the officer's table, nose buried in a flight log. "Ground run only." "But the numbers, she ran cool, Tom, fuel at 110 mph, felt like she could go forever." McGuire's eyes lit, that predatory gleam surfacing, the same spark that had bagged him a 0 at 400 yards over Weiwok. "Lindbergh's no fluke then. All right, kid, tonight, we take her up, real air, real test." He clapped Hayes' shoulder, the gesture sealing a pact. Rebellion starts small, a whisper, a dial twist, but it grows. The day dragged under a sky of hammered lead, patrols scrubbed by a squall line marching in from the Solomons. Thunder grumbled like artillery in the distance, rain sheeting the runway into a slick mirror that reflected the gray. Pilots killed time in the ready room, a bamboo lean-to papered with pin-ups and kill tallies, playing acey-deucey with dog-eared cards, the slap of pasteboard punctuating tall tales of flak fields and furballs. Colonel Charles MacDonald wandered in mid-afternoon, his boots squelching, pipe unlit between his teeth. He carried Lindbergh's notebook, its pages thumbed to fragility. "Slim's got a clinic set for 1600. MacDonald drawled, his Texas twang cutting the fug of sweat and boredom. Hangar 3. No uniforms. Just flight suits and open minds. Man sketching curves that'll make your head spin. Torque versus RPM, combustion efficiency at altitude. Says the manual's tuned for takeoff power, not endurance. We're burning fuel to chase speed we don't need over water." The room stirred, murmurs rippling like wind over kunai. Peterson, from the corner, adjusted his spectacles with a sniff. "With respect, sir, that's tinkering. We've got doctrine for a reason. One bad valve, one seized piston, and we've got a ditched pilot on our conscience." MacDonald fixed him with a stare, steady as a gun barrel. "Pete, doctrine got us from Pearl to here, but it's choking us now." Lindbergh didn't solo the Atlantic on Army charts. He listened to the engine. He tapped the notebook. "Who's in?" Hands rose tentatively. McGuire's first, Hayes following, a smattering from the vets. Kowalski poked his head in from the door, wiping hands on a rag. "Me too, Colonel. If it's engines, it's my dance. Peterson stayed seated, arms crossed, but his eyes betrayed the fracture. Curiosity warring with caution. The clinic unfolded in the hangar's belly, amid the clutter of tool carts and wing stands, the air acrid with solvent, and the faint ozone of welding arcs from the far bay. Lindbergh stood at a makeshift easel, a salvaged blackboard scrawled with chalk diagrams, cylinders pulsing like hearts, fuel-air curves arching like parabolas. He was no showman, his voice even, hands gesturing with the precision of a draftsman. "Power's a balance," he explained, drawing a line from low RPM to high manifold. At 2,238 inches, your book setting, the prop bites too fast, strokes too short, fuel floods the chamber, burns dirty, heat builds, efficiency drops. He sketched the heresy, the line sloping upward, 16 at RPM, 48 inches. Slow the prop, let the boost fill the stroke. Longer dwell time, more complete combustion. Cylinders run 50 degrees cooler, fuel economy jumps 30%. It's not magic. It's physics the Wright brothers knew but war rushed past. McGuire leaned forward, tracing the curve with a finger. "So we flew scared, chased the RPM ghost." "Fear's a hell of a throttle," Lindbergh replied, a rare smile cracking his reserve. "But engines don't fear, they perform." Hayes absorbed it all, the chalk dust tickling his nose, the words sinking like ballast. "Physics, not faith. We've been pilots of paper, not air." Questions flew. Kowalski on plug gaps, a vet on turbo lag, but beneath it the seed took root. Possibility, fragile as a spark in damp tinder. As dusk bled into night, the whispers metastasized. In the showers, cold water sluicing off the day's salt, steam rising like battlefield fog, pilots traded fragments. Heard Hayes, ground ran one, burned half. Lindbergh's graphs, temps don't lie. Over cards in the tent, McGuire seeded the ground. Tomorrow's ferry to Nadzab, who's game for a live test? Nods furtive. Even Peterson, eavesdropping from his bunk, didn't interrupt. His silence a concession, the first crack in the wall. Midnight found Hayes and McGuire at the flight line, the field hushed under a canopy of stars that wheeled indifferent overhead. Whirlwind waited, chalked and primed, Kowalski's shadow merging with the nacelle as he tweaked the mixture. No moon now. The night was ink black, broken only by the red glow of nav lights flickering to life. Hayes strapped in first, the cockpit enveloping him, harnesses biting shoulders, oxygen mask cool against his jaw. McGuire took the lead bird. Pudgy 3, his voice a steady hum in the radio. 2 ready, clear for taxi. "Clear," Kowalski echoed from the ground, waving arm circles. The chocks came away, props whispering into spin. They rolled into the wind, a phantom formation of 2, the coral runway vanishing beneath like a pale vein. Rotation was gentle, the lightnings lifting with a sigh rather than a surge. Climb rate steady at 1,200 feet per minute, not the book's frantic 1,800. Up they spiraled into the velvet dark, the jungle falling away to the silver-threaded sea. At 10,000 feet, McGuire keyed the mic. 2, set over square, 1,600 RPM, 48 inches. Lean to auto. Hayes twisted the dials, the engines responding with a deepening timbre. Grumble, the vibration shifting from buzz to pulse, syncing with his breath. Manifold pressure swelled, the turbo whooshing faintly behind the panel. Fuel flow dipped, 105 GPUO. It's real. In the air, it's real. The horizon blurred into oneness, stars bleeding into the ocean's gloss, the only sound the steady rush of slipstream and the Allison's contented roar. They flew east into the void, a 200-mile loop over empty water, no targets, no threats, just the test of endurance. McGuire's voice broke the monotony. "How she feel, kid? Honest. Like cheating, Major? Smooth as silk. CHT at 410, EGT 380, fuel's barely moving." Hayes glanced at the chronometer. 45 minutes airborne, tanks reading 380 gallons, intact, almost mocking. The book said we'd be at 280 by now. Thirsty ghosts. An hour in, doubt crept back. What if it's the calm before? Valves floating at this boost, but the gauges held firm, needles steady as a sextant. They traded headings, weaving through wisps of cirrus that trailed like cigarette smoke, the cockpit's chill sanctuaries where fear thawed into focus. McGuire spun yarns over the radio. His first kill over Cape Gloucester, the Zero's wing folding like tinfoil, but Hayes heard the undercurrent, relief, raw and unspoken. "We're not just surviving, we're soaring." 2 hours, the coastline reappeared, a darker smudge against the sea. McGuire, "RTB 2, punch it if you need, but I won't." They descended into the pattern, props idling low, the runway lights winking like fireflies. Touchdown was poetry, mains whispering on coral, the reverse thrust a gentle whoosh rather than a howl. Taxing in, engines feathered, Hayes felt the afterglow. Muscles loose, mind alight. Kowalski waited with the bowser, dipstick in hand, his face splitting into a rare, full grin as the numbers came back. 290 gallons reserve. Double the book. In the black of night, we doubled it. McGuire hopped down, pulling off his helmet, hair matted with sweat. Well, he demanded of the gathering shadows. Kowalski, a curious sentry, even Peterson lurking at the hangar edge, arms crossed but eyes hungry. "It's gold, Tom," Hayes said, voice thick with awe. She didn't falter. Not once. Lindbergh emerged from the gloom, notebook in hand, drawn by the engine noise, or perhaps the pull of kindred spirits. "Told you," he said simply. "No triumph, just fact. Engines thrive on truth." Peterson stepped forward, his skepticism a shield cracking at the edges. One flight. Could be luck. But his tone wavered, the mirror of doubt reflecting back. What if it's not? The whispers swelled with the dawn, filtering through the squadron like humidity through linen. In the briefing tent, pilots exchanged glances over coffee. On the flight line, ground crews tweaked props with new reverence. McGuire cornered McDonald by the jeep pool, the colonel's pipe forgotten in his hand. "Sir, it's spreading. Quiet, but sure. We need to sanction it before some hothead flames out chasing ghosts." McDonald nodded slow, the weight of command settling like dew. "Lindbergh's briefing, GHQ tomorrow, Kenny's listening. But till then, eyes open, mouths shut. We test, we learn. No martyrs." That evening, as the sun drowned in the sea, painting the lightnings in crimson, Hayes sat on his wing, watching the horizon swallow the light. The air cooled, carrying the brine of waves and the promise of storms. We flew wrong for so long. But tonight, we flew free. Awe settled deep, a quiet fire. Disbelief burned away, leaving the glow of what could be. Across the field, McGuire lit a smoke, exhaling toward the stars. "He's breaking the rules," he murmured to no one. Or perhaps to the night itself. And winning. The squall that had scrubbed the patrols the day before broke with the fury of a kamikaze, unleashing sheets of rain that hammered Hollandia like divine wrath. Water cascaded from the corrugated roofs of the hangars, turning the coral runway into a network of milky rivers that snaked toward the drainage ditches. The jungle steamed under the onslaught, fronds bowing like supplicants, the air electric with ozone, and the distant crack of lightning forking over the bay. In the heart of it all, the 475th Fighter Group's dispersal area became a sodden hive. Ground crews in ponchos wrestling tarps over exposed engines, pilots huddled under eaves, their flight suits chafing against damp skin. The scent of wet earth mingled with the sharp bite of avgas, a reminder that war waited for no weather. Colonel Charles McDonald stood at the edge of the storm, rain sluicing off his helmet like tears, pipe clenched unlit between his teeth. He'd called the morning briefing indoors, in the relative shelter of the ops tent, a canvas cathedral where maps yellowed on the walls and the air hung heavy with the fug of wet wool and stale tobacco. The pilots crammed in shoulder to shoulder, water dripping from their brows, eyes fixed on the greaseboard where McDonald had sketched the day's target. A Japanese convoy off the Weiwok coast, 280 miles northwest. Oil barges and troop transports, fat prizes if the weather held. But the real undercurrent wasn't the mission, it was the heresy simmering in their midst. Lindbergh's method whispered like a contraband prayer. "All right, listen up," McDonald drawled, his voice a steady anchor in the downpour's roar outside. He tapped the board with a yardstick, the convoy icons circled in red. "4 ship, led by McGuire. Hayes, you're his wing. Fowler, Reese, tail and top cover. Launch at 600 if the ceiling lifts. Primary, sink those barges before they offload. Secondary, any air if it shows. Range is tight, headwinds out of the slot at 20 knots. RTB on bingo, no exceptions." His gaze swept the room, lingering on McGuire and Hayes, then on Lindbergh, who sat quietly at the back, notebook open on his knee like a scholar in a foxhole. Major Thomas McGuire shifted in his seat, the canvas folding chair creaking under him. At 25, he was the squadron's firebrand, compact, intense, with a mop of dark hair plastered by rain and eyes that burned with the hunger of a man who tallied kills like groceries. The night flight had lit something in him, that over-square hum echoing in his dreams. engines breathing easy, fuel gauges mocking the manual's doom. But doubt lingered, a shadow twin to the thrill. One hop in the black don't prove shit. Combat? That's where gods bleed. He caught Hayes' eye across the tent, the kid's face pale but set, the raw edges of fear honing into resolve. "You set for this, Lieutenant?" McGuire murmured as the briefing broke, voices rising in a swell of chatter. Hayes nodded, swallowing against the lump in his throat. The cockpit's embrace still felt foreign with the new settings, like dancing with a partner who led too gently. "Yes, sir, but Lindbergh's coming up?" He'd overheard MacDonald offering the civilian a ride-along, observer status, logged but not flying. The thought twisted his gut, a legend in the back seat, judging every twist of the dial. "Insisted," McGuire replied, clapping his shoulder. "Says it's the only way to show it, under fire, real loads. You game?" "Game as I'll ever be." Liar, Hayes thought, the Rain's tattoo on the tent roof syncing with his pulse, terrified. But curious too, like peeking behind the curtain of God. Tech Sergeant Victor Kowalski was already at work when they emerged into the gray light, the storm's fury ebbing to a persistent drizzle that beaded on his poncho like mercury. He knelt by Pudgy 3, McGuire's bird, torque wrench in hand, fine-tuning the props to Lindbergh's specs, coarser pitch for the low RPM pull. The mechanic's face was a mask of concentration, rain carving rivulets down his stubbled cheeks, mixing with sweat that never quite dried in this theater. "She's dialed, Major," Kowalski grunted, straightening with a wince, his bad knee, souvenir from a prop strike on Guadal. 1600 on the nose, boost to 48. Plugs gapped for lean. But remember, auto all the way, no manual tweaks mid-fight. McGuire grinned, the wolfish flash that preceded a kill. "Trust the machine, Sarge, or the man who built her." He nodded toward Lindbergh, who approached with that unhurried gait, duffel over one shoulder, flight gear borrowed and ill-fitting, a lieutenant's Mae West too baggy on his slim frame. The civilian's eyes held the calm of altitudes long conquered, but Hayes caught the flicker. Not fear, but the electric anticipation of proof. "Ready when you are, Tom," Lindbergh said, voice soft against the dying rain. No rank, no deference, just the equality of those who'd bet their lives on wings. He climbed the ladder to the rear cockpit, settling in with a practiced ease, harness snapping taut. McGuire followed to the front, Hayes slotting into his own Pudgy 4 beside them, Fowler and Reese forming the diamond. The ground crew swarmed, chocks pulled, signals flashing in the murk. Engines stirred, first cough, then roar. The Allisons belching smoke that twisted in the wind like genie wisps. Takeoff was a baptism, props clawing the mist, the runway vanishing under a bow wave of spray. Hayes lifted last, the Lightning's nose wheeling skyward at 110 knots, smoother than the book's surge. The climb, a languid spiral through the overcast. At 8,000 feet, they broke into sunlight, a golden sea above the woolen blanket below, the Bismarck Sea a glittering expanse broken by foam-flecked waves. Oxygen hissed cold into masks, the cockpits chilling to that bone-deep bite where breath fogged the canopy in fleeting ghosts. McGuire's voice crackled over the radio, steady as a heartbeat. "Flight, this is lead. Set cruise 1600 RPM, 48 inches manifold. Auto lean. Call it out." "2 copies," Hayes replied, twisting his levers. The engines responded with that now familiar growl, deeper, throatier, the vibration a massage rather than a rattle. Manifolds swelled, props coarsening to a lazy whirl, airspeed settling at 175 knots, slower than the manual's dash, but the fuel flow, 102 GPR. It's holding. In the light of day, under load, it's holding. Fowler and Reese chimed in, their affirmations laced with the tentative wonder of converts. Lindbergh, silent in the back, jotted notes. Gauges, headings, the wind's subtle push. An hour out, the coastline sharpened. New Guinea's north shore, a jagged emerald blade thrust into the sea. Weiwok's Asia shrouded harbor, a scar of invasion scars. Intel pegged the convoy at anchor, 3 barges heavy with drums, escorted by a pair of Kates on patrol. McGuire tightened the formation, wings overlapping like cards in a fan. Eyes sharp, bogies at 12 o'clock low, range 20 miles, arm hot. Hayes' pulse spiked, adrenaline souring his saliva. The world narrowed to the gunsight reticle, the stick slick in his grip. Below, the sea churned white where the convoy plowed north, black specks of aircraft circling like vultures. Reese's voice, taut, lead 3, splash in 5, dive port side. The formation rolled in unison, a silver arrowhead plummeting from the sun, a classic Thocweave setup, but laced now with the unknown. G-forces built, 3 Gs pinning Hayes to his seat, the cockpit a whirl of needles and altimeter spin. At 5,000 feet, McGuire pickled his bombs, 500-pounders tumbling earthward in a lazy arc, fuses hissing to life. Hayes followed, the released jolt lightening his bird, the world tilting as he pulled out in a climbing turn. Tracers lanced up from the barge's deck guns, pops of orange against the blue. But the bombs walked the water, the lead strike erupting in a geyser that swallowed the first barge's bow, secondary blasts ripping drums skyward in fireballs of avgas. Hits, lead, hits on primary, Fowler whooped, his lightning jinking through flak bursts that bloomed like black flowers. But the Kates were awake now, 2 Nakajimas, wings glinting red, diving to engage. McGuire's call snapped like a whip. Bandits, break left! Guns, guns, guns! The furball ignited, a chaotic ballet of smoke and silver, engines screaming as they twisted through the merge. Hayes's heart thundered, the stick yanking against autopilot muscle memory as he hauled into a barrel roll, 50 caliber hammers chattering in his wings. A Kate flashed across his nose, bullets stitching his canopy in a lethal rain, glass spiderwebbing, but holding. Too close, too damn close. He reversed hard, gray forces blurring his vision, and squeezed the trigger, tracers arsing like comets, chewing the Kate's engine to tatters. It smoked, trailing oil that sheened the sea below, spiraling into the drink with a final, futile burst from its guns. McGuire was poetry in the lead. Pudgy 3 corkscrewing through the second Kate's fire, his burst severing a wing at the root. The Jap fighter cartwheeled, debris fountaining into the waves. Splash 2, flight, tally exit, form on me. But Lindbergh's voice cut in from the back, calm amid the frenzy. Tom, hold cruise. Don't chase the RPM. She's got the legs. McGuire keyed back. Copy, Slim. Setting now. Even in the adrenaline haze, he twisted the dials, RPM bleeding down from the combat spike, manifold steadying at 48. The engine's roar softened, that resonant hum returning like a benediction. Hayes mirrored it, his own bird shuddering as the props bit coarser, speed bleeding to 200 knots, but the surge steady. No cough, no heat spike. Fuel flow checked mid-turn, 115 jump out, higher from the fight, but dropping fast as calm reasserted. It works. In the red, it works. The remaining barges burned, oily smoke pillars marking their graves, the surviving Kate limping north on one engine. The formation climbed out, echelon left, the sun warm on their backs as they punched through scattered cumulus. Silence fell over the radio, broken only by the steady whoosh of slipstream and the Allison's contented purr. Hayes glanced at his gauges. 2.8 hours airborne, tanks reading 285 gallons, impossible per the book. Combat dive, evasion turns, bomb run, and reserve for the hop home. We danced with death and came away lighter. Lindbergh broke the hush. Temps. CHT 415, EGT 1420, McGuire reported, voice edged with wonder. Fuel burn averaged 108 since merge. She's purring. Slim. Good, that's the proof. Manuals for straight lines, wars curves. A pause, then softer. You flew it right, boys, felt it? Hayes leaned into the mic, the canopy's cracks spidering his view like fate's web. Felt it, sir. Like she was waiting for us to let go. Laughter rippled. Fowler's bark, Reese's chuckle. The sound foreign after the gun's thunder. A crack in the armor of routine. The return leg unfolded like a dream. Headwinds that should have clawed their margins now mere breezes against the efficiency. They droned at 12,000 feet, the sea a vast indigo canvas below, islands dotting it like emerald commas, Manus, Admiralty, the green smear of New Britain fading astern. Conversation flowed, desultory at first, kill confirmations, flak near misses, but it veered inevitable to the method. Reese, the old hand with a mustache like a broom bristle. Admit it, Tom. Felt wrong at first, like throttling a racehorse to a trot. Did, McGuire conceded, banking gently to clear a Thunderhead's anvil. But she stretched. That Kate had my 6. I goosed her to 2,400, and she surged, then back down, and fuel didn't chase it. Hayes listened, the cockpit his confessional, the stick light in his hand, the oxygen's dry kiss on his lips, the faint vibration syncing with his slowing pulse. Fear turned to curiosity. What else did the book hide? What skies could we claim if we trusted the hum over the numbers? He pictured the lost ones, Vance, spiraling into foam, the unnamed from the 433rd, ditched off Gnome 4. If we'd known then, Peterson's voice intruded on the all-squad frequency, patched from the tower, curiosity cloaked in duty. 475th, this is exec debrief on approach, weather's VFR, and Colonel wants Lindbergh's log, all of it. No accusation, but the edge was there, the skeptic sniffing for flaws. They crossed the coastline at 1,000 feet, the airfield a coral cross in the green, kunai grass rippling like a welcome mat. McDonald waited on the tarmac, rain jacket gleaming, Kowalski at his side with the fuel truck idling. Touchdowns were textbook, mains kissing gravel, props feathering to that low, satisfied rumble. Hayes taxied up last, killing his engines with a reluctance born of intimacy, the silence sudden and profound, filled only by the tick of cooling metal and the distant surf. Ground crew swarmed, chocks thudding home, ladders clanging against booms. McGuire and Lindbergh emerged first, the civilian's face flushed not from G's but from the glow of validation, notebook clutched like a talisman. McDonald gripped his hand, the Texan's drawl warm. Heard the calls, Slim? Sounded like music. How'd she hold? Better than music, Colonel. Combat config, evasive. Burned 142 gallons total. Reserves 3 and 10. Double the profile. Lindbergh handed over the log, pages dense with scribbles, curves of manifold versus time, temp traces like heartbeats. Kowalski was already dipping tanks, his grunt audible over the engine whine. Starboard 305, port 308, Christ on a cracker. It's gospel. He straightened, wiping the stick on his rag, eyes meeting Hayes with a nod that sealed brotherhood. The crew murmured, numbers rippling outward. Fowler's bird at 295, Reese's 300. Undeniable. The manual's math shattered on the tarmac. Peterson arrived then, jeep sloshing through puddles, his spectacles fogged from the dash. He dismounted stiffly, clipboard in hand, the skeptic's armor dented but intact. Impressive, he allowed, scanning the log with a frown that didn't quite hide the spark. But one mission. Variables. Wind shear, lighter load post bombs. We'd need logs, controlled. Pete, McDonald interrupted, clapping his shoulder with a firmness that brooked no debate. Variables are war. This worked. Boys came home breathing easy. He turned to the formation, voices hushed in a semicircle, pilots, crew, even the radioman edging closer. Debrief at 1400. But mark this. Lindbergh just flew us through hell and back on a prayer the book called Sin. Fuel savings? Undeniable. Now, who wants to run it again tomorrow? Hands rose, tentative then firm, a wave cresting. Hayes felt it swell in his chest, curiosity blooming like the sun through clouds. Not fear anymore. Wonder. What if we rewrite the whole damn thing? McGuire sidled up, helmet under arm, rain-damp hair curling at his temples. You see it, kid? That Kate had us dead, but she carried us. Saw it, Hayes replied, the words tasting of revelation. The air cleared, sun shafts piercing the overcast, gilding the lightnings in gold. Kowalski slapped a fresh dipstick away, grinning through his whiskers. Engines don't forget, Lieutenant. Neither will we. The debrief tent filled by afternoon, the storm a memory in the drying mud outside. Coffee steamed in mugs, maps unrolled across trestles marked with fresh pencil strokes, extended radii arcs pushing toward Mindanao. Lindbergh stood at the board again, but this time the room leaned in, not with doubt but hunger. He sketched the flight trace. Outbound lean, combat spike, return efficiency. The curve a scimitar slicing through the manual's flat line. It's not about speed, he said, chalk dust clouding the air like incense. It's reach. Over water, in the dark, that's where it saves lives. Questions poured. Hayes on post-dive recovery, Fowler on propware, even Peterson piping up on turbo intercoolers. Hypothetically, sir, at 20,000 feet, his resistance fraying into fascination. McDonald watched it all, pipe relit at last, smoke wreathing his head like a halo, from whispers to wildfire. Give it a week, and it'll be doctrine. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the flight line in amber, the P-38 shadows lengthening like promises. As the session broke, Hayes lingered by the door, the tent flap stirring in the breeze, carrying salt and frangipani. McGuire paused beside him, lighting a lucky strike, the match flare etching lines on his face. What are you thinking, Elias? That look, half-drowned cat, half eagle. Hayes met his gaze, the day's adrenaline a low hum in his veins, curiosity a flame unquenched. The manual lay open on the table nearby, its pages innocent now, exposed. We flew it, fought it, won it. Aloud, he said, maybe the manual isn't gospel. The sun rose on Hollandia like a reluctant interrogator, its rays probing the mist-shrouded valleys of New Guinea, with a heat that built slowly, inexorably, turning the airfield into a skillet by mid-morning. The coral strip shimmered with residual moisture from the night's drizzle, each pebble a prism refracting the light into blinding shards. Overhead, a flight of B-25 Mitchells droned northward, their props a distant buzz that blended with the ceaseless jungle chorus, the whine of cicadas, the guttural calls of hornbills slicing through the fronds. On the ground, the 475th Fighter Group stirred to life. Jeeps churning dust along the perimeter track, armorers wheeling ammo carts with the clatter of brass links, and pilots emerging from tents with the bleary-eyed resolve of men who'd traded sleep for salvation. Lieutenant Elias Hayes moved through it all like a man half awake, his flight boots scuffing the gravel as he made for the flight line. The debrief from the Weiwok run still echoed in his bones. The acrid tang of cordite clinging to his suit, the phantom vibration of throttles twisted against the grain. Lindbergh's method wasn't just numbers now, it was muscle memory, a subtle shift in the hand's dance on the quadrant that promised wings where there'd been weights. But doubt lingered, a low-grade fever. One fight. What if the next cracks the block? He passed the maintenance revetments, where Tech Sergeant Victor Kowalski held court over a cluster of grease monkeys, their overalls stiff with yesterday's grime, tools laid out like surgical instruments. "Morning, Lieutenant," Kowalski called, wiping a rag across his brow, leaving a streak of high-temp grease like war paint. He was elbow-deep in Hellzapoppin, Fowler's bird, cowling propped open to expose the Allison's innards, a labyrinth of pushrods and valves gleaming dully in the sun. Slept like a baby? Or dreamed of manifold gauges? Hayes managed to grin, the kind that masked the churn in his gut. "Somewhere in between, Sarge, running her again today?" Kowalski nodded, his ham hands deftly torquing a spark plug. "Fowler's hopped to Nadzab, ferry job, light load. Wants the dials set your way. Low and slow. I've got the logs from yesterday. Post-flight borescope shows cylinders mirror clean, no pitting, no carbon. If anything, she's wearing less than the book birds." He paused, glancing up with eyes narrowed against the glare. "But Peterson's sniffing around, wants every plug pulled after. Due diligence, he calls it." The mention of Major Elias Peterson sent a ripple through Hayes, a reminder of the fault line running through the squadron. Peterson was the embodiment of the old guard. Precise, unyielding, his world a ledger of checklists and change orders. The exec officer's tent was a shrine to procedure, filing cabinets bulging with flight reports, walls pinned with performance graphs that curved like the manual's unassailable truths. Yet even he had cracked the door yesterday, his questions in the debrief veering from critique to calculation. Hesitation, Hayes thought, the brass bending, but not breaking. Not yet. By 900, the flight line hummed with purpose. Colonel Charles MacDonald had greenlit a series of efficiency trials, officially logged as variant testing, with Lindbergh's imprimatur from General Kenny's staff. But the word had spread like monsoon rot through the ranks. Pilots clustered around the birds, flight jackets slung over shoulders, cigarettes dangling as they pored over grease pencil annotations on cowlings. 1648. Auto. Trust the hum. McGuire was there, of course, his energy a live wire, pacing beside Pudgy 3, briefing a knot of wingmen with the fervor of a revivalist. "It's not just range, boys," McGuire said, jabbing a finger at the prop dome. "It's the feel. That deep thrum means the stroke's full, combustion clean. No hot spots chewing your valves. Hayes here'll vouch, we danced with Kate's yesterday, and she begged for more." His grin flashed, infectious, drawing nods from the circle. Veterans like Reese, whose mustache twitched with reluctant amusement, and rookies wide-eyed as Hayes had been a week prior. Captain Harlan Reese leaned against a wing strut, arms crossed over his chest, the scars on his knuckles white from gripping sticks too tight. "Easy for you, hotshot. You've got 9 lives. Me? I've nursed enough coughs to know when an engine's lying." But his eyes betrayed him, flicking to the throttle quadrant visible through the open cockpit, levers poised like a dare. Adapting, one twist at a time, Hayes slotted in, accepting a smoke from McGuire. Felt it on the pull-out cap. Dive burned 20 gallons, but recovery? Back to 110 GPRs like nothing. If the book's wrong on endurance, what's it hiding on wear? The group murmured agreement. the air thick with the scent of sun-warmed aluminum and the faint, sweet rot of overripe papaya from the mess scraps. But the idyll shattered with the crunch of boots on coral. Peterson, clipboard in hand, his khakis starched despite the humidity, spectacles perched like a judge's gavel. "Gentlemen," he said, voice clipped as a Morse key. "Trials are just that, trials, no loose talk. And McGuire, your formation's down one. Lieutenant Grant's bird threw a rod on standard crews this morning. Coincidence?" McGuire's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed even. "Coincidence, Major, or maybe the book finally caught up. We're logging everything, temps, flows, hours. Let the numbers fight it out." Peterson's gaze swept them, lingering on Hayes with a flicker of something almost paternal, warning or wariness. "Numbers don't ditch over the slot, Captain. See that they do." He turned on his heel, vanishing toward the ops tent, leaving a wake of tension that settled like dust. The first adaptation flight lifted off at 10:30, a 4-ship ferry to Nadzab, the auxiliary strip hacked from the Markham Valley's kunai grass, 200 miles southwest. McGuire led, Hayes on his wing, Fowler and a new transfer, Lieutenant Tex Harlan, filling the box. Kowalski's tweaks were evident in the takeoff roll. Smoother acceleration, the props bite deeper without the frantic spin-up, rotation at 105 knots instead of the book's 120. Airborne, they climbed through a layer of broken stratus, the cockpits filling with the chill bite of altitude, oxygen masks fogging briefly before clearing. Flight lead, set variant 1. 1,600 RPM, 48 inches. Auto lean, call ready. McGuire's voice was a lifeline in the static, laced with the thrill of transgression. "Too ready," Hayes echoed, his hands steady on the levers now. No hesitation, just the subtle click as manifold pressure swelled. The Allisons growled in response, that resonant timbre vibrating through the airframe like a tuning fork struck deep in the chest. Airspeed stabilized at 168 knots, economy incarnate. Fuel flow pinning at 98 jph. Adapting. She's leaning into it, like she was waiting. Below, the Owen Stanleys unspooled like a rumpled green quilt, rivers threading silver through the folds, the sea a distant azure haze. The leg unfolded without drama. No bogies, no flak, just the vast solitude of the Pacific Theater, anvil clouds boiling over the ranges, the occasional glint of a river convoy snaking inland. But in the quiet, the shifts began. Fowler, ever the joker, keyed the mic midway point. "Lead 3 feels like I'm flying a goddamn airliner. Where's the surge? Thought we were fighters, not FedEx." Laughter crackled through the headsets, Reese's bark cutting sharp. "Better an airliner that lands than a fighter that swims for. My gauge says 112 gallons burned in 90 minutes. Book calls for 180. Tex, you buying this?" "Hell yes, sir," Harlan replied, his drawl thick as sorghum. The kid was green, first combat tour, freckles fading under tan, but his voice held the awe of revelation. "CHT at 395, she's cooler than my bunkmate's beer." McGuire chuckled, banking the formation into a gentle S-turn to bleed time. "That's the crack, boys. Obedience built us safe, but this stretches us." Hayes listened, the words sinking like ballast. Culture cracking, from whispers to wing chatter. What happens when command hears the echo? At Nadzab, the strip was a frontier scar, runway of compacted dirt and Marston matting, ringed by eucalyptus groves that whispered in the valley breeze. They touched down in loose formation, wet tires thudding on the perforated steel, dust plumes rising like smoke signals. Ground crew from the 35th Fighter Group swarmed out. Australian-accented sergeants with sun-leathered faces, their lightnings wearing desert camo from Darwin days. As the canopies popped, McGuire hopped down first, helmet under arm, and was met by a lanky major with a pipe of his own, echo of MacDonald, but with a down-under twang. "G'day, Yank." "McGuire, is it?" "Word's out, you're tinkering." "Kenny rang, says Lindbergh's gospel's got legs." The major, Elliot, per his wings, clapped McGuire's shoulder, eyes twinkling. "Mind a demo? Our boys are range-starved up here, lost 2 to the Ramu last week." McGuire didn't hesitate. "Demo it is, but it's no tinker, it's truth." He turned to the formation, Hayes and the others forming up like disciples. "Log the shutdowns, let 'em see the dipsticks sing." The Nadzab crews obliged, their Bowsers rumbling up with the efficiency of men who'd fueled under fire. Dipsticks plunged, emerging with readings that drew whistles. McGuire's tanks at 285 gallons remaining, ferry profile, no drops and reserved for a dogfight. Fowler's 278, Hayes 282. Harlan's voice rose in the circle. Book says we'd be scraping bottom. We could loop back to Hollandia and still have beer money. Word spread through the valley strip like fire through dry grass. By afternoon, a crowd gathered. Pilots from the 8th Squadron, mechanics with wrenches paused mid-swing, even a smattering of raft types nursing tea from tin mugs. Lindbergh wasn't there, back at Hollandia briefing Kenny's aides, but his ghost loomed in the grease pencil marks. The shared notebooks passed hand to hand like samizdat. A wiry Aussie sergeant, face creased like old leather, peered into Hayes' nacelle. Low revs, eh? Our Allisons hate that. Valves chatter like magpies. But yours, quiet as a nun. Quiet and long-lived, Hayes replied, the words feeling bolder on his tongue. Adapting us all, from skeptics to seekers. Kowalski, who jeeped up with spares, nodded from the wing root. Pull the plugs if you like, mate. Cleaner than your mum's kitchen. The Major Elliot lit his pipe, puffing thoughtfully. Commando balk. Always do. But numbers, they don't lie. He glanced at the horizon, where thunderheads massed like unspoken doubts. Run it live tomorrow? We've got a recon sweep to the Huon. Join us? McGuire's grin was answer enough. Wouldn't miss it. Back at Hollandia by dusk, the jeep convoy wound through the potholed track, headlights cutting the twilight like knives. The air cooled to a sticky embrace, fireflies winking in the underbrush like errant tracers. Hayes rode shotgun in McGuire's lead vehicle, the Major at the wheel, radio crackling with patrols checking in from the north. Conversation turned to the day's logs, fuel curves plotted on crumpled charts, temp traces that defied the red lines. The war's end came not with a thunderclap, but a slow exhale. The Pacific skies of late 1945 softening to a bruised purple over Hollandia's coral strip. The jungle's edge, once a wall of menace, now whispered peace. Cicadas humming hymns of armistice, the distant surf a sigh against New Guinea's shore. The 475th Fighter Group's P-38s stood silent in their revetments, props stilled, their twin booms gleaming under a sun no longer shadowed by war. The air carried the faint tang of avgas and victory, a scent of closure that clung to the men who'd rewritten flight in the crucible of combat. Lieutenant Elias Hayes sat on a crate by Pudgy 4, his flight suit unbuttoned, the breeze cool against sweat-damp skin. His logbook lay open, its pages a chronicle of transformation. Missions stretching 1,000 miles, fuel gauges defying the old math, the hum of over-square Allisons, a song of mastery. The manual that once chained them, its rigid charts of 2,200 RPM and 600-mile limits, had been relegated to kindling, replaced by new editions stamped Pacific Standard, extended range. Hayes traced a final entry, a 10-hour escort to Leyte, 900 miles, landing with 160 gallons. We didn't just survive, we reshaped the sky. Major Thomas McGuire joined him, his boots crunching coral, a rare quiet in his stride. The ace's tally had climbed to 38 kills, but his eyes held a deeper victory, the triumph of belief over fear. Heard from Kenny, he said, lighting a cigarette, the ember glowing like a fading star. Doctrine's set. Every fighter squadron in the Pacific flies our way now. P-51s, Corsairs, even the Navy's Hellcats. Lindbergh's curves are in every cockpit. He exhaled, smoke curling toward the stars. We did that, kid. The transformation was complete. By September 1944, the over-square method, 1,600 RPM, 48 inches manifold, auto-lean, had spread from Hollandia to Okinawa, a wildfire of innovation that burned through the 5th and 13th Air Forces. Missions once suicidal were now routine. 1,200-mile strikes on Balikpapan, rescues off Palau, escorts reaching the edge of Japan's home islands. Fuel, once rationed like hope, became abundant. Losses to ditching plummeted to zero. MacArthur's leap to the Philippines owed its speed to fighters that flew where bombers once faltered, their radii redrawing the war's endgame. Tech Sergeant Victor Kowalski was packing his kit in the maintenance shack, his workbench cleared of borescopes and plugs, now relics of a Revolution I. Engines told us all along, he grunted to Hayes, tossing a clean spark plug in his palm like a talisman. We just had to listen. My birds'll outlive me now. His laugh was warm, the Chicago grit softened by pride. His ground crews now legends training stateside mechanics for a post-war Air Force. Colonel Charles McDonald stood by the ops tent, his pipe a faint glow in the dusk, the map board behind him a tapestry of victories. Leyte pinned, Luzon circled, Tokyo within reach. GHQ sent a commendation, he told the gathered pilots, his drawl steady as a rudder. Says you extended the war's reach by 6 months, saved 1,000 boys from the drink. His eyes swept the crowd. Hayes, McGuire, Captain Harlan Reese, with his mustache now graying, the rookies who'd never known the old fear. You broke the book and built a better one. Major Elias Peterson, the skeptic-turned-convert, lingered at the board's edge, his clipboard retired, his spectacles catching the lantern's flicker. I logged it all, he said to Hayes, a rare smile cracking his reserve. Every curve, every hop, you proved it wasn't madness. His nod was a salute, the last echo of hesitation buried under data's weight. Charles Lindbergh, the quiet catalyst, had left Hollandia weeks prior, his notebook copied across the theater, his khakis a ghost in the Pacific's memory. But his words lingered, shared over beers in the mess. Engines don't lie. Men do, when they fear the truth. His Atlantic crossing, once a lone act of defiance, had seeded a revolution that carried fighters to the war's end, each hum a testament to courage over caution. Hayes flew one final mission before the surrender, a 1,000-mile patrol over the Moluccas, Pudgy 4 gliding at 1,600 RPM, fuel flow a whisper at 92 GP/hour. The cockpit was a sanctuary, the stick an extension of thought, the sea below a mirror reflecting a sky unbound. No bogeys, just peace, the hum a lullaby, gauges steady as faith. Landing, he taxied to dispersal, Kowalski's dipstick confirming the legacy, 170 gallons left. You rewrote her soul, the sergeant said, slapping the cowling. That night, the officer's tent glowed with lanterns and laughter, tin mugs raised to a war won and a doctrine reborn. Reese toasted the future, to wings that reach. The cheer shook the canvas, a final hymn. McDonald's voice cut through, soft but seismic. You didn't just fly farther, you thought deeper. That's the victory. Hayes stepped outside, the stars a canopy over a world remade. The manual's chains, fear, obedience limits lay broken, replaced by a truth forged in flight. Progress isn't faith in rules but courage and uncertainty. He thought of the lost, Vance, ditched off Manus, the unnamed swallowed by the sea. They flew the book. We flew beyond it. The morals settled, etched in the quiet hum of memory. They broke the rules to survive, and in doing so, redefined what flight meant. As the night deepened, the jungle song a soft requiem, Hayes whispered to the stars, every manual ends where courage begins. If you love true stories of courage and defiance that changed history, subscribe for more unseen chapters of World War II.